everybody, and welcome in. It is a special edition podcast of the Manely Broncos Podcast, because we do not just have one guest, but we have two guests, and we have a very special guest, and that is, I'm sure you probably know his name by now, with everything going on in the Broncos country, social media world, or just breaking down the simple position of a quarterback. It is the special edition of the podcast where Tim Jenkins joins the podcast, and I'm sure we all know about him through the All Things Quarterback that you guys can find over on YouTube and so on and so forth. So before I introduce the other guest, Tim, I just wanted to say thank you so much for hopping on with us and, really just kind of helping, us, not just watching you, but just getting the chance to talk to you and getting the chance to learn from you. I just wanted to say, thank you so much for hopping on with us.
I'm pumped up, man. Thanks for having me. And I hopefully everyone knows me from either like tweeting at me that they hate me or that they're enjoying the breakdown. So, love-hate relationship on Twitter is what I've learned.
Yeah. And you got Sarah Benninger, another friend of the podcast that is joining us too, and then my partner in crime, the host along the side with this podcast, Matty Moles, or as I like to say, Gordon Ramsay Jr., as he does this whole food adventure and drink adventure. So you guys can follow him over on Twitter at Matty Moles Pod. We're going to have something really fun. It's going to be like this one big question and answer session with you, Tim. And I'll kind of start it off right now, like right then and there. Obviously, the huge seismic bombshell that had happened, last week with John Elway and then the bombshell that none of us really even predicted, which was the following one, which was Joe Ellis.
Yeah.
Stepping down as well. I'll ask it more from like a quarterback perspective. Like, what do you do? You're in, John Elway, from everything that Mike Kliss had said, was your biggest supporter. So what do you do mentally and physically, really, to just kind of get your mind right with the fact that maybe your biggest supporter is not going to be there every day?
Yeah, I mean, I think the same thing that you were going to do anyways, which is, get your footwork right and work on everything you need to work on this offseason. Because the truth of the matter is, no matter how much John Elway liked him, if you're Drew Lock, you couldn't have played this season and possibly thought, man, I'm safe long term. So, I think it kind of leaves him in the same spot. The only thing that I think changes that at all, right, is if the GM comes in and then goes out and gets, there's a certain level of veteran quarterback if you go get. Those guys don't come in to back up. They don't come in to, like, help transition, right? They're not Joe Flacco. If you go get Matt Stafford, he's not sitting, right? Matt doesn't come in here and go, hey, let me help you, Drew. Like, he's here to be a starting quarterback and win games. So I think that would be the only thing that would kind of change anything for you. But, unfortunately, or fortunately, right, Drew's under contract and he's got to do everything he can to become the starter. And quite frankly, I've said a lot, obviously, that I think the fixes for him are simple. People make them into a lot, but I honestly think it's simple. And I think if addressed correctly, I think we're all sitting here next year and, the kid's, 26 and, 26 touchdowns, 10 picks, kind of that kind of season. And, like the narrative completely shifts for him. So, I don't think you can read too much into it. I do think, it'll be interesting to see what the new GM does. If I come in and I'm a GM, listen, I've got a young quarterback and I've got a coach who, if I give another year to, it's really a free year for me, right? If I give him another year, worst case scenario, it sucks. I can blow everything up. Best case scenario, it works out, and then I look like the guy who was like able to look at the roster and really, evaluate it without emotion of it wanting to be my guy. So I honestly think it's, I would say I still think it works in his favor for him and Vic to be back. But shoot, man, in terms of a GM, I have no idea what those guys actually end up thinking.
Right. Go ahead, anybody. You guys can follow. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think you just made an interesting point, Tim, in terms of just basically this is a bulletproof year for the GM if he wants it to be. But really the same isn't true for Vic Fangio, right? I mean, Vic Fangio is going to be in year 3, and as a head coach, like, okay, now you've got this your first year underneath your belt, and you've got your second year now with all the COVID and everything crazy going on this past year. It's such a young roster, new offensive system and everything. So if you're Vic Fangio, what are you lobbying for in terms of, hey, I mean, this could be my last year, like you just alluded to, so if you're Vic Fangio, how are you approaching lobbying for the quarterback position this offseason?
Yeah, honestly, if I'm Vic Fangio and I have to win, it's either Drew Lock or an upper echelon quarterback who's got years in the league. Because, listen, I'm going to walk down to Pat Shurmur's office, right, and there's certain guys that aren't going to come in and comprehend his system right away. Like Matt Stafford, right? And I just use him because everyone talked about him. I actually have no idea if he's in play or anything like that. But, a guy like Stafford walks in. He's seen so many NFL playbooks, right? Like, some people call it, Flutie F sale, right? The Lions call it, or Gruden calls it Y banana, right? It's all the same. And a guy like Stafford has seen all that. This is what's crazy about Broncos country, because Broncos country is pounding the table to come bring in a young quarterback to fix young quarterback errors. Like, listen, if you watched the national title game last night and thought to yourself, you know what? So the very first possession, right? There's a tight end running, screaming down the middle, wide open. They're in cover 2. The Y, we called it a cricket 9, but he's just on a little search route. The Mike linebacker's running with him. That in the NFL is wide open, and Justin Fields passes it up. So if you're sitting there thinking to yourself, hey, man, we're going to trade up. We're going to trade all of our first-round picks. We're going to go get up, and we're going to grab Justin Fields, and then we're going to win. You're crazy. If you're going to bang the table of go grab him and then, let's blow everything up, okay, I can understand it. But, no, there's not a quarterback in this draft, maybe Trevor Lawrence, but honestly, the more I dive into his tape, I don't know, that comes in and is the solution next year. And if you're Vic Fangio and you're on your way out, I'm not taking somebody who I know is going to not be good year one. So that's where it's interesting. I think it's probably in Fangio's mind, it's probably an elite veteran or nobody, and whether the GM sees it that way, that'll kind of all be, that's what I think is more interesting here is the dynamic of Fangio's possibly on his way out with the GM who's coming in and knows he has time. They're kind of probably working on two different missions, and I wonder how that will really work. Because I would imagine that would be tough. But
yeah, go ahead, Matt.
So I saw your breakdown today on Drew Lock and can he be the guy moving forward. It was really exciting to watch that progression. And I got to say, I don't think you were fanboying or anything like that.
Yep.
You were just kind of breaking it down and saying it how it is. And it was really awesome to see, okay, from early on in the season to week 14, what were some things that he, learned on, hey, I'm not going to hit the running back here. I'm going to hit the tight end, things like that, and a breakdown for, something he saw and he had an answer for later. What are some things that, say he is the guy, right? Say we bring in somebody as the GM and they're on board with giving Locke another full season, a legit opportunity to be the guy. Third-year quarterback expectations, and I know that different guys in different systems have different timelines and stuff like that, but put up or shut up year is year 3, really, as a starter in the league. What are some things that you would expect to see out of Drew Lock in that year moving forward to prove that he's the guy?
Yeah, listen, so I always preface this, right, because everyone's always hammers me. They're like, you say he could be a top 10 quarterback. I'm like, absolutely. Bring him on down the street. We'll get him ready in 6 weeks, right? But if he works the things that he's supposed to work, genuinely, this would be the year that you would need to see the statistical jump, right? So what we're currently seeing is the film growth. And with that, right, there's the mistake he makes against Kansas City. There's other situations that, listen, that's bad football. But what we're seeing is, hey, this is promising from his eye placement and all this other stuff. Next year is the year that you want to see it all come together. You would want, listen, if I'm in the front office, I'd want to see a 25-10 year, right? Where he's 25 touchdowns, 10 picks. I want to see, less than 3% probably from a post-snap decision-making process, meaning his eyes were in the wrong spot. We need to get that basically down to nothing. in year 2. And then, just for me personally, what I would love to see from him would be, hey, listen, do we feel like you took the right drop on every single route? Do we feel like, when you were in scramble drill, you made the right decisions? Because that's where I kind of saw the errors. But that's also from the receiving room too, right? That's what pisses me off about all this is, like, as a guy who's played, especially in college when our offensive line, and I went to Fort Lewis, which is a school nobody's heard of unless you research me just to say, hey, you went to Fort Lewis. But listen, as a guy who's been out of the pocket, like getting chased, there's nothing quite like seeing your receiver jog. Like, if you wonder what, like, Tom Brady and Rodgers and these guys really crucify these dudes for, it's when they're getting chased, about to get their collarbones broken, and their receiver's like, this play's over. Like, that's the stuff that we can't have. So those are the things that I think as a whole offense we need to address. But no, I would fully expect, hey, we're looking at 25-10, or we're looking at a way more productive season. Because listen, next year would be the year that even if we kept seeing the film growth, but the production just wasn't there, that you would have to say, like, hey, while I see he's still growing, he might not actually be the guy, right? That would be the year to make that call. It's just the reason that I'm probably giving this, I don't want to say I'm giving him a pass, but the reason that I'm been impressed with the film growth is because what I saw from week 1 to week 10, right, or week 14 or whatever, the growth is what you would expect to see from him had he had OTAs where you could actually put your stuff on film and coach off it. That's what we forget. Everyone's like, oh, everyone had these same OTAs. It's like, dude, to compare like Teddy Bridgewater with what they're doing in Carolina with Joe Brady and Drew Lock, it's just like, it's unfair. Let's not forget, where was Teddy just a second ago? He was in New Orleans. And where did Joe Brady come from before he went to LSU? New Orleans. Like, we're acting like they don't call H Viper. Like, you think Joe Brady got to LSU and was like, hey, listen, Sean Payton knows what he's doing, but I'm going to change the names. No, they call it the exact same thing. So Teddy came from that exact system. So when we have these things, or we say, oh, Justin Herbert, it's like, I agree, Justin Herbert had a great year. Look at his drop variability. The dude took like 6 drops all season. And those are like little things that fans glaze over that, like, I can't tell you how mad it makes me, Maddie, because you sit there and then the same fans, year 2, okay, Cam Newton, great rookie year, right? And then everyone says, oh, D coordinators figured him out. Why do you think that? Because they simplified the playbook so he could be ultra productive early, but then long term that doesn't help you. So, how many times have you heard media people say, oh, D coordinators in the NFL, they figured him out. Like it happened with Cap, right? Like Cap was crushing it in read zone. Cap was crushing it in some of their modified quick game they were doing because Harbaugh had simplified it, right, from his time in college when kids have to pretend they go to class. He had simplified it so when he's with the Niners, they can, and then they did that with Cap, and then everyone's like, oh, D coordinators figured him out. It's like, no, they just kept it simple. So I would be very surprised if Herbert's level of production stays the same next year without adding complexity to his footwork and everything else. And that'll be the interesting thing. So listen, I think we are putting Drew Lock in a PhD level offense, and it was reflected in the different footwork patterns and everything else he had to do. And I personally think that's going to pay off next year. There's a lot of people that think that he's the worst quarterback they've ever seen. And obviously they haven't videoed themselves at Turkey Bowl if they think that. But, yeah, I mean, that's what I would tell you in terms of, what I would want to see from his growth and also why I think it's going to happen and why I've seen some guys that were maybe more productive early, but they always fade, and that's not what we want to see from our quarterback.
One of the popular questions, obviously, is continuity, right? And then we had just asked about the general manager and the influx of the new general manager and potentially director of player personnel. Drew Lock has been a little bit unfavorable when it comes to continuity. Yeah. I mean, he's not had any continuity except for maybe this year. I mean, I believe there was one year when he was in Missouri where he had continuity, and I believe he said after his in his end of the year presser that this was his favorite year because now he can actually go back and go through some stuff, actually figure out what it is that I can actually go off of and fix. And, I believe he mentioned footwork is one, and that he's going to be spending a bunch of his time in Denver. When you look at it just from the sheer continuity aspect, is that one of the strong favors of really kind of rolling with Locke? Just the fact that you can actually give it to him. Shurmur has been pretty particular and pretty positive about him, and Fangio has been kind of hit and miss. We started out in like 2019 where he called him a quarterback. It was basically like a pitcher who didn't know how to throw, basically. And then near the end of 2020, he called him, the capability of being a pretty darn good quarterback. To end of the year, it's like we're back in square one again.
Yeah.
So, continuity, I'm guessing, is like the thing, right, for Drew and them tending it to him versus a guy like Lance, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, listen. So one, I wouldn't read into Fangio what he said much, right? Like, there's like a coaching style that's like that. Think about Bruce Arians, right? How many pressers have you heard him just be like, if Tom Brady plays better, we're going to be good? That's just like an old school. They don't care like about what they say about their quarterbacks. That's what I would put Vic in, and it's nothing against him, right? Like, listen, if I was the OC, I'd walk into his office and be like, hey man, could you maybe like be quiet? Like, don't talk about the quarterback. Like, let me talk about that. But listen, the Pat Shurmur thing is such a huge deal. And so I talk about this a lot. You guys hear it all the time, right? Analysts who are like, oh, the game is slowing down. The game doesn't slow down, right? Everyone still runs a 4-2. It's not like Madden. It's not like, I can't even remember the movie, but Kevin Costner's the pitcher where it's like he gets in the zone. And everything's blurry. Yeah, that's stupid. That never happens. Like, I've thrown for a lot of yards in college. Never once was it like blurry everywhere else. Like, I still knew where the sorority chicks were sitting. Like, where everything is. So that doesn't happen. The biggest thing for these guys though is and I think we saw it. I honestly think we saw it week 10. But the biggest thing is at some point as a quarterback in the NFL, you go from trying to just absolutely regurgitate the play as fast as possible because you just got in your headset and you can't remember it all, to, oh my God. So I tell a story all the time. When I was in St. Louis, it was during rookie camp, and we had this play. It was called Twins Right Guns, Scat Right, Cat, F-Bin, X Shallow H Sneak. Well, I had come from an offense in college that was like wristband 30, so I couldn't do it, right? I kept fumbling over it, and then eventually we break the huddle. I get to the line, and it's the first time I'm going against the ones, and I'm looking across. At the time, it's James Laurinaitis, right, who was a really good player back then. I'm looking at him, and I'm about to go into my cadence, and I realize that I have no idea what play we're running because I just tried to call it. So, I do what every quarterback does, which is you just check the ball down and move on, right? Pretend the look wasn't there. But, like, you go from a point of trying to just spit out the play and really having no idea what's going on to, hey, guess what? I'm really comfortable now. And so now I'm going to start to shift my focus from what the heck is Jerry Jeudy running to what coverage am I getting? And I think that's what we don't talk about enough as to why we saw that increased production in terms of touchdown to INT ratio is he really started to play against the looks. And Matty, you hinted at it, right? That week, maybe 10 Oakland game, he didn't even recognize man zone on the mesh concept, and he throws it to the back, and Royce gets rocked. Week 17, against an even harder look from a trap coverage standpoint, he recognizes man and gets to the shallow. So for me, it's like those are the things. And just from and I know everybody trashes me, and it's not like I played 10 years, but just from being in the shoes of trying to learn a system like that, it is so incredibly difficult that I just have massive understanding for what that kid was going through weeks 1 through 10, and especially because he didn't really have OTAs. And everyone's like, oh, well, he had the playbook. It's like, dude, having the playbook and going out and thinking you know what Pat Shurmur thinks versus putting something on film and Pat Shurmur calling you in his office and being like, hey, Drew, what the heck were you thinking are two different things. Sorry, this is my new intern who lives with us now, Harker, walking in.
Dude, your Chick-fil-A's there.
The most important question, what sauce do you got in the bag?
We get the Chick-fil-A and ranch.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Chick-fil-A Ranch.
What?
Team barbecue all the way. Let's go.
Dang.
We're in the midst of, we're moving into new offices. Not that your listeners care about this, but we're moving into new offices, and he was just there all night, like with the movers and stuff. It's been the worst experience on planet Earth, but we're almost done.
Gotta have Chick-fil-A to get you through, right?
Yeah, you have to. Well, our house, I have 3 little ones, right? We have a 4-year-old, 2-year-old, and a newborn. Like, good luck telling my wife, who's been with them all day, like, hey, hon, I'm going to need you to make me something when I get home at 8. Like, yeah, it ain't happening. I'd prefer to stay married my whole life and not try this again. So.
Right.
She's like, I'll make you a bed on the couch. That's what I'll
that's
make you.
What I'll make, yeah.
There's a pillow and a sheet.
You can sleep in the basement with Harper.
That's awesome. I was thinking as you were just talking there a little bit about continuity, and gosh, it makes me think of just connecting with Justin Herbert, talking about him before as well. How huge was it for him to have Keenan Allen for the majority of the year, and how huge was it for Drew not to have Courtland Sutton? I mean, part of me wants to be like, well, Courtland Sutton would have just been the security blanket, and he may not have made those same progressions that you just talked about throughout the course of the year. I mean, that's a really rudimentary thought, but I think just in terms of Herbert joining a team where everybody's been part of the offense already, they all already know what's going on, and he kind of just has to step in and do his job right, whereas Drew is learning the offense along with pretty much everybody else in it. And not that Courtland would have, known the offense anyway. I mean, he's, the veteran of the team, having been in the league for 2 years at that point. But, I mean, he's a star. And so what difference does having him make going forward for Drew that maybe you could draw the comparison to Keenan Allen with the Chargers?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's even bigger, right? And I don't think it's rudimentary at all to say a safety blanket. Like, listen, Matt Stafford looked real good throwing a Megatron early in his career, right? It's nice to have a guy that you can go to. And I'm not saying Courtland Sutton's right, Calvin Johnson, but here's my thing. Even just getting Courtland Sutton back, the things that you then get into as an offensive coordinator. So when I have Courtland Sutton back, so they ran a lot of 12. Broncos would run 12. I wouldn't say a lot, but they ran 12 personnel every once in a while with Vanette and then Fant, like on one side, and then they would put 2 receivers on the other. When all of a sudden you're going to start to put Jerry Jeudy in the slot, you can do so much stuff, right? And then you can also motion him across and get to 3-by-1, and you have a great route runner outside as well. So there's a lot of stuff that just offensively is going to create a nightmare situation. I've said on talking about stuff on KOA, I've said before that the number one thing I would do if I was Pat Shurmur this offseason is work on OT1 personnel. We ran in St. Louis with Jared Cook, but it's no backs, 1 tight end. I put 4 receivers out there. Give me KJ Hamler, give me Jerry Jeudy, give me Courtland Sutton, and then who am I missing that I like a lot? Tim Patrick. Give me all 4 of those guys out there with Fant, and you're going to run it 4 snaps a game. And then guess what D coordinators love to do when they see an exotic look? They love to panic and use 30% of their work week prepping for something you're going to run 4 times. Okay, so that's how you get D coordinators. Like, do you think anyone really, like, here's my thing. Everyone, like, crucifies Sean Payton like he's stupid. You really think Sean Payton likes to take Drew Brees off the field? No. But the fact that they have Taysom Hill run in there for 3 plays a game, every D coordinator all week is talking about, guys, we can't. Okay, listen, when 7 comes in the game, right? Like, that's, you can hear it right now. They hammer those guys, and they spend so much time on it. In reality, the Saints are like, we don't really even care about this, right? It's a throwaway play until he gets stripped, right? Like happened in the playoff game this week. But, listen, I think there's so much stuff they can do. So I think getting Courtland back from, I have a guy I can go to is good, but I think what this offense creativity wise can get to, and love him or hate him, anyone who thinks, I was hearing some radio guys and TV guys like trying to say the game passed up Pat Shurmur, which I totally get watching some of the play calls early, but the stuff that I saw him getting to late, I was thinking to myself, man, this is great stuff. This is like, some of the stuff it was like you had seen the Cardinals doing, and I'd make the argument that Cliff is one of the most innovative guys in the NFL right now. He's got Kyler Murray to do that too, which is probably fun. But, and that pad that he had on draft day, what a treat that would be to live there.
Oh my gosh. I like the Lego version of it even better than the real. That was great.
But I do think it's going to be awesome to see what they do. I think, I really think week 1 we could see some fascinating stuff where Cortland and Jerry are on the same side, and they're in 12 personnel, or they get into some of this stuff where it's like they have 4 really good receivers. I mean, why even put a back on the field? Just put Noah Fant there and let's just be an empty.
Yes.
And, listen, we did it with, my draft class was Tavon Austin, right? So, Tavon was the guy that we would motion back in the backfield and run some run plays with. Mm-hmm. Don't tell me KJ Hamler can't do that. I could see KJ motioning back, give him a couple, especially because remember what happens. We put OT1 in the game, right? And sorry, I hate to get but hopefully your listeners like it. We put OT1 in the game, right? So no running backs, only a tight end. What do they immediately do? They get into quarter. They bring in 7 DBs. Good luck stopping a run. Got 7 DBs in the game. So that's the kind of stuff that I think Shurmur will get to. That's just a nightmare. And then when you force a team to where they have to bring, 6 or 7 DBs, you also force them into other roster moves. There's so much stuff that comes with all this. That the guy who sits on his couch and drinks Bud Light and yells, "I could do that," Drew Lock. Like, they don't get it. But there's just so much that comes with Cortland coming back. So, I mean, it's a great point. And I think it probably did help his growth a little bit, like you said. I think you're probably dead on with that. So it's one of those things that you deal with a year where you lose a lot of games, but it could really pay off next year.
So to kind of piggyback a little bit off of Cortland, one of the things that, and I know you talked about it, one of the things that kind of made all of us like pull our hair out and almost gouge our eyes out was the deep passes.
Yeah.
And we all know that Cortland is one of the best as far as a deep threat because he's not your prototypical 50-50 guy. He's like a Mike Williams. He's like an 80-20 guy, a guy that can you just throw it up. He's winning basically every single time. Is it fair, like a legit fair argument that the lack of Cortland on some of those deep passes is in essence why Drew kind of struggled? Now, granted, I know that's kind of hard to say because we're starting to see a lot of those big, massive air mails happen in like week 15 and 16 and 17 and so on.
Yeah, listen, I think it's listen, there's no excuse for the post stuff he would miss on. Like, when I'm throwing a stick at 8 post, right, where we get the safety to jump and the post over the top, that's never a 50-50 ball, right? So he's just missing those. There is something to be said, though, when you're looking outside and like, listen, we all know who was the go ball everyone said, oh, he checked to it. But who's the go ball that he hit against Carolina, right? It's KJ. Yeah, I wouldn't love, KJ, I don't want this to come off wrong. KJ, I think, is a great receiver, and I think he's going to be a really good slot receiver in the league. But it's like throwing to my 4-year-old, right? He's not tall, right? I'm not talking about a big guy that's like, oh, he's going to body somebody up, So, yeah, it's drastically different when I look outside as a quarterback and see KJ. So I'm going to try to, like, drop it perfectly, So, yeah, I think Drew needs to be more comfortable missing to the sideline and short. But listen, like, for me, if I'm sitting there, and this is what we talked to a lot of our quarterbacks about, right? And it came up to bite me in the butt when PJ went out in week 17 because he kind of did a little bit what we talked about. He threw a couple picks. But, if you have a quarterback, you want to teach them to hunt, right? Hey, it's man coverage. We're going to hunt. We're going to be on the attack, right? We're not just going to check it down. We're going to be on the attack. You have to be comfortable as a quarterback coach knowing that, let's say we're going to say, 10 interceptions this year. As long as we're at 25 or above touchdowns, we're going to be okay with 10. I want 8 of those to come on 50-50 balls, right? If we trust Cortland and we put him up and, hey, those are the things where he gets, someone beats him, awesome, right? Or they come on the one, because, full transparency, I hadn't started breaking stuff down until Ben asked me to come on. So this season in review was fun because I went back and watched every single snap, right? Which everyone also makes fun of me on Twitter for, which is like weird. It's like, dude, I apologize that I found the time to do that. I'm sorry. I'm sorry you hate me. But seeing that interception that he threw in New England where the DB like dives, like, come on. We'll live with those. You're taking a shot. You're hunting. If a DB dives 4 yards and makes a pick, so be it. Like, those are things that you can't care about. So, I think you brought up a great point, Cam, and I think, I think having Cortland back is going to be awesome. I don't know. We would have to really ask Locke, hey, man, how much, did you know where you were missing? Or is it a situation where, like, that's a red flag of, was he doing that all the time in practice? Like, those are things that we'll never know.
Right.
But those are, I would assume that having Cortland Sutton back is going to help him take something off the football and trust him and push it outside and just give him a shot to make a play.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that you had frustration, or you could see the frustration from some of Pat Shurmur's play calls early in the season.
Yeah.
And we did not hold back our frustration on this podcast with some of those calls. It seemed as though Pat Shurmur wasn't giving Drew enough early wins to kind of get in rhythm. I liken it to basketball, like a shooter having to see one go through the hoop to kind of get going. And if you're having a rough shooting day, like even a free throw works, right? Just give me a screen with some type of pressure and let our playmakers go to work.
Matty, I'm on your team. You're talking to a guy who was a terrible shooter but thought he was like a great shooter in high school. You could ask all my buddies. They're like, Tim would jack up 33s and make 4. So, yeah, you got to give him something early.
Look, I'm the type of guy. Well, I mean, fair. I wear like the arm sleeve and the headband and the brand new kicks. Like, I'm gonna look the part until we actually like play ball, and then like the true colors will shine. But for like 2 seconds, you're gonna be like, "What's this dude about?"
During layup lines, Matty looks sweet.
Yes.
As long as we stick to right-handed layups, I'm golden. So, with that, what do you want to see? So I asked, what do you want to see from Drew Lock next year? Pat Shurmur's going to be the guy calling plays for us next year. If he's with Drew Lock, what are some things that you want to see him highlight more of in order to set Drew up for success, not just as a young quarterback, but to also like highlight his natural strengths?
Yeah. So, I mean, Matty, you brought up a great thing. I talked about it. I talked about it and I thought I did a good job of talking about it, and then an article picked up what I was talking about, and they didn't explain it right. So it was like, I was like, oh gosh, do I email him? I didn't know what to do. So it's called P and 10. So P as in Peter. When you refer to P and 10, it means possession and 10. So it's the first down of a drive, right? So the first and 10. So think of it as like, hey, it's a touchback. It's our first play. Not the next 1st and 10, the first one. An NFL playbook really should be built out with a ton of completion plays for a quarterback on P and 10 for the exact reason you're talking about, right? There's literally offensive coordinators. If you were to walk in and say, hey, what's your favorite P and 10 call? They'd be like, oh, Matty, I like, twins right, scat right, F ship, and I want my guy to just hit the ship route and we'll move on. Like, guys that have been in the league for a long time, if you were to, I would love a media person to ask Pat Shurmur, because they would look at that guy and be like, hey, man, I actually like you. And Shurmur would tell you, hey, here's what we have belief. So my issue is the same as yours. I thought our P and 10 was, hey, we're just going to run the ball every time. And then I thought that we would get into action and deep shots off of it. Like, let's get the dude. Yeah. And you brought up a great point. What I saw it get to was more boot action, which was that easy completion to Fant, usually. Or they started running the play I talked about on the breakdown, which is Subway, right? Just double slant arrow, get him something. They ran a ton of, they do a lot of flood outside concepts, but they would do a ton of more of like, hey, really 2 clear outs and a speed out. Those kind of things really helped Drew. So, yeah, we'd love to see his P and 10 menu expand. I think you want to see his overall – I think this is what – so I know you guys probably saw it, but I got in some big Twitter spat around Christmas about cover 2 and Drew Lock struggling against cover 2. And I made some jokes that maybe I shouldn't have about it's not the coverage with the big blue circles, right? It's a little more complex than that.
Right.
There's this stat floating around that Drew Lock is bad against cover 2. And for me, it's like, okay, I don't doubt the analytics that's there. If you were to ask Drew Lock what coverage he doesn't like to throw against, he wouldn't tell you, I think I struggle against cover 2. Like, we don't think like that. If you were to ask Pat Shurmur, hey, what of your reduced menu, because, COVID happened, right? There was like a global pandemic that then they couldn't do OTAs. What of your play call menu don't you have enough of? I guarantee Pat Shurmur would say cover 2. Like, this is to me more of a situation of he didn't have the full play menu in. And then when you look at what we face in our division, literally the Chargers ran cover 1 robber 90% of the time. The Chiefs I see in single high all the time. The Raiders, they look like they were in cover 1 the whole freaking week 17. So if I'm Pat Shurmur and I don't have a lot of time, you know what I'm going to prep for? Cover 1 and all the single high variations, not cover 2. So that's where they probably were hurting on play calls. And, but that doesn't make for good radio, right? Good radio is Drew Lock sucks against cover 2. Here's what I do against cover 2. But the fact, like, if you were to give them a whiteboard and say, draw up cover 2 and what a corner does against 2 vertical release, they'd be like, oh, he just stays here. It's like that doesn't happen in the NFL. So there's a lot of stuff that I think from Pat Shurmur's perspective, I just want to see an expanded menu. If I were to boil it down to one thing, Matty, I'd say I want to see an expanded menu so he has everything that he's going to need throughout an NFL season. And that's what I would tell you if you were to really take an honest assessment of what we're seeing in the NFL from a play caller perspective. These guys, unless they have Aaron Rodgers or Drew Brees or Tom Brady, have a drastically reduced menu this year. Listen, that's why I feel bad for, I feel bad for guys like Doug Peterson. This is going to come off unpopular, but I feel bad for Adam Gase. I actually know him from when he was in Denver and texted him and gave him a hard time about his first ever Jets press conference where it looked like he was like on some sort of Xanax or something. But, it was like the craziest face I ever seen. But listen, it's, you feel bad for these guys knowing that, and again, it's hard to feel bad when they're making, what they make and then it's still guaranteed. But,
right.
This to them, right? And this is something that I had to get used to being around an NFL locker room. Like Sam Bradford, when I was there, right? He was still on the biggest rookie contract ever. Sam, every week that we got our ass kicked, never came back in the locker room and was like, at least I'm rich. Like, that's not what it, these guys are so hyper competitive. They want to be good at their profession. So you feel for these guys where it's like Pat Shurmur's probably sitting there thinking to himself, yeah, we suck against cover 2 because I only have these 19 plays in. Then normally his menu's 80. So that's what I would kind of say I want to see from him is that expanded menu again. And then, like you said, you nailed it. We need better PN10 plays to get Drew in a rhythm. And even if Drew's not the quarterback, like, shoot, bring in Trey Lance, bring in Zach Wilson, trade all the way up to number 1 and bring in Trevor Lawrence. You need good PN10 plays. If you don't have good PN10 plays, your quarterback's not going to be in rhythm, and he's going to struggle the whole day.
Go ahead, Sarah.
So you talk a little bit about, bringing somebody in. That's kind of what I was gonna talk about next a little bit. Is like, obviously, it seems from the outside perspective that the Broncos are going to bring somebody in this offseason. I know in the past, Ben has mentioned even Sam Darnold, named a couple of different names. There's obviously plenty of names out there from, potentially Andy Dalton, Jameis Winston. I mean, take your pick. There's plenty of guys out there. So for Drew, and take us inside the quarterback room a little bit, because what is it like to have a veteran like that potentially come in with some clout, some serious experience? Is it really the intangible value that people say, like, oh yeah, you bring in a veteran like Ryan Fitzpatrick, it's going to make your young QB better because Ryan Fitzpatrick is super veteran QB. But we saw kind of in Miami this year the opposite of that a little bit, and he's not exactly that way. So what is the value to bringing in a better hedge for Drew? How does that work in his favor?
Yeah, well, ask Tua how having Ryan there helped. I think, listen, this is what everyone hates about NFL quarterback play, and what makes other positions so mad is that people care about that room versus like the DB room. We're like, yeah, bring him in to make it more competitive. We don't care. But the reason is because those rooms don't really have to work together the same way ours does. Like, your backup quarterbacks are in charge of part of the scouting report. They're in charge of part of what you're seeing, right? You come to the sideline, you have a guy who is telling you what shell they were in every time. Like, hey, I was a little fooled. What was his depth? And they're like, okay, one was at 10, one was at 12. Like, that doesn't exist in the other rooms. Like, there's, of course, communication, but it's not the same. So, listen, like the guys you named, Jameis Winston, that doesn't help the room. It makes it more competitive, doesn't help the room. If he loses the job, the room's not going to be better, right? I'm going to tell you that right now. Him backing up Drew Brees and him backing up Drew Lock are two different things in Jameis Winston's head, right? Bring in Dwayne Haskins, again, competitive, but not going to help the room. We could go down the list of quarterbacks, and I could tell you, yep, that's going to help the room or not, right? A majority of the guys that are available right now that people are talking about for Denver, it's coming in to add more competition. It's not going to help the room long term. If that's what they want to do, they got to do it. And then if you get someone in the draft, you're not really getting a real competitor in my standpoint, from my perspective, because none of these kids, what I've seen on tape, run remotely anything near what they're going to have to run with Pat Shurmur. And, like, we're building a lot of guys in this class into something, and we do it every year, right? Every single year, there's 4 franchise quarterbacks that you can't miss on.
Yep.
And then every year, 4 years later, everyone wants to run those guys out of town. Like, think about, what year was it? Jared Goff and Carson Wentz, right? That was just a couple years ago.
Yep.
Aren't they the same draft class? They were the same draft class, right?
They were.
16,
Those were the
17.
2 can't-miss franchise guaranteed quarterbacks. And now fast forward to 2021, and I've seen people who are ready to run Jared Goff out of L.A., and people are sure ready to run Carson Wentz out of Philadelphia.
Yep.
So it's like, okay, save me the, like, I get that people are like, I get that people get emotional about quarterback prospects and they want a new franchise guy. But, like, guys, let's be honest. There's a reason there's just a couple Aaron Rodgers top. Like, this is a hard position. So we're not going to find franchise guys every year. And they're usually not going to come from the guys that we think, right? Aaron Rodgers at Cal looked like hell, He looked as robotic as it comes. So, I think from bringing a young guy in, you're not going to bring in real competition. So it just comes down to what that GM wants to do. Does he want to bring in a real competitor for Drew? Because it's not going to help the room. Listen, it's going to be unpopular, but I went back and I watched the Ripon game. Who were we playing? The Jet? Who did we play?
Jets.
Jets. I went back and watched that. He didn't have a terrible game, right? From an arm talent perspective, I don't see the same stuff that I see in Drew. But in terms of putting a good game on tape, it wasn't terrible. And people are ready to run him out of town, and it's like, I'm not. So, there's a lot of people that overreact to all this. I honestly think if you're going to go out and you're going to try to bring in a guy like Matt and like Stafford or Darnold or whatever, like if that's the move, the way I would interpret that from what I know is that Drew Lock is not the guy, and that then we'll be drafting a guy either this year, next year, or the year after, and Matt is here until then. So, but then you also get in the weird situation where it's like Tua, and you bounce back and forth between a guy who definitely can't be the guy for the next 5 years because Fitzpatrick is, he's eventually going to decide I'm done, right? The beard at some point has to stop. And then, Tua, it's like, well, now how does he feel, So it's like you're in a weird situation, and I get, like, everyone always gets sensitive, like, oh, what do you mean, how does he feel? It's like, dude, like, listen, how often do you see Pepsi, right? I've recently, because we were all locked inside, I think everybody became day traders for a second. But do you ever see an investor be like, you know what? Let's hire in and let's bring out a new CEO for Pepsi and have a little bit of competition. No. Could you imagine that board meeting? Hey, here's the guy we're going to bring in. We're going to let him make half the decisions. We want a little bit of competition. No, you don't do that with the most important guy in an organization. And unfortunately, in the NFL, that's the quarterback. So, that's where that room is different. It's a different deal than the other rooms. Everyone hates to hear it. And, everyone says it's the elitist QB, but it's not, man. That's the way the NFL is. And once we get back to running the ball 60 times a game, we'll feel like that again about running backs, but we're never going to go there. And, we got to care about how those guys are feeling.
Right.
Well, we sure tried against the Saints.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. That was the best thing, I think, to happen to the NFL, though, because it eliminated everyone who was sitting there thinking, I could do that. Because Kendall
Right.
Hinton or whatever is a world-class athlete who was a Division I quarterback, and he looked very normal, right,
Very normal,
out there.
yes.
He looked like
Pedestrian.
just got called up from accounts receivable. Like, hey, man, why don't you go try?
Yeah. Yeah.
Give it a shot.
So this is kind of like a little bit of a layered question. So one of the big things that I felt that Drew does need to work on in his mobility, the use of his legs, and not just that, but also protect his body better.
Yeah.
You know those awkward slides that aren't exactly a Kyler Murray baseball slide.
Yeah.
And I think that now to kind of translate it to say a guy like Lance, a guy that is just he's very, very athletic, or even a guy like a Justin Fields, but to even do like a layered question with this, with just in particular Trey Lance, if I were to just say that there's probably maybe one quarterback that could probably keep you within you can start Drew Lock in 2021, and no matter in probably whatever he does in 2021, you have Lock if he succeeds, and then you have Lance that you can roll with in 2022 or whatever. But is that necessarily a right strategy? I mean, if you're looking at it from just a quarterback perspective, guys like Zach Wilson, Zach Wilson, Justin Fields, Trey Lance. Yeah. How exactly would you rate those guys? And are those types of players, quarterbacks, whatever, that would be fitting that 2021 type of narrative, should we say?
Yeah, so I'm probably not gonna give you the best answer because I talked about this on Twitter a little bit of like I really want to watch these kids and know these kids before like giving my opinion on them. With that being said, I'm about to release a Trey Lance breakdown, so I know exactly what I think about him. And I honestly think if you take Trey Lance at 9, I wouldn't touch him in the first round. Mm-hmm. Based on everything I've seen. And I hate saying that because I always root for these kids. I wouldn't touch him in the first round. I think anyone who touches him in the first round is watching his film with glasses on and turned on like the I want a mobile quarterback version of the rose-colored glasses. Because there's multiple times. I mean, I don't know. Did you guys see the clip I tweeted out where he runs boot? And there's literally a guy running down the field wide open.
Wide open, yeah.
And he instead runs and he trucks like 4 people and scores a touchdown. Well, how do you see that? Do you see that as this guy's insanely athletic? Or do you see that as we just missed a wide open over for a touchdown and then I took $30 million I invested and ran it head first against a safety, right? So that's, there's 2 different ways to look at it. So, Trey Lance specifically, no. I think if we took him, I think it's a huge mistake. I've started to work on Justin Fields a little bit. He's much more impressive. I don't think he'll be available at 9. Like, listen, I was seeing someone tweet today that they think it could be Lawrence, Fields, Wilson, Lance, the first 4 picks. If that happens, 3 of those GMs are getting fired. I'm going to tell you that right now. But, Fields is more impressive. He's more intriguing. But I honestly think if we take a quarterback in the first round, I think if we take a quarterback in the first round, the next decision that GM better be is to walk down and fire Vic and especially Shurmur and then rebuild the whole thing. See if you can trade Drew for like a 3rd or a 4th and just move on. That would be my take. But no, I think, Cam, you brought up a great point about Drew and his mobility because he is athletic enough to run and make plays. But listen, the sliding thing you brought up, that's the greatest thing on planet Earth to work, right? You guys got to come down to a training session when we work QB slide because all you'll see is a hot-ass turf field in July and a slip and slide out there. And you'll see some dudes, right, running their butts off and then sliding because it is something you have to work on. But it's fun, right? I might even take the top off. I've been riding the Peloton, might start looking decent. You know what I mean, Maddie? If I drink too much of Maddie's I know I'm going to get back into having the keg and the wife won't talk to me, so I can't do that.
Look, it's dad bod and dad jokes all day for me, so that's kind of where I live.
Yeah. Sounds like you just described an early 2000s Mike Shanahan practice right there, Jim, with the slip inside. And that's good stuff.
We go old school every once in a while, but, listen, like, obviously, I wake up every day and feel super lucky to do the stuff we do, and then those are the days that it's, like, even better. Those are the days that everyone sees our Instagram, and I'll get a text from my buddy who, like, works at Charles Schwab, and he's like, dude, do you even work? It's like, yeah, this is work. We're just doing slip and slide today.
Exactly. Got to get that in.
Yes.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. I think, so many of the things that you've mentioned throughout just the course of, listening and watching your breakdowns and things like that are things that, I hate to say that Broncos country is so divided, but it is. But I hate to say that it's so divided into these sections that, like, I can truly say that the guys on this podcast were believing in and for the things that you ended up talking about, and we had that same backlash coming at us throughout the whole course of the season, like, just preaching patience, preaching, well, he'll be able to fix whatever the minor issues are, even though, we don't necessarily even know all the time what they are. We see things from the TV broadcast, and we read intangibles. We read post-game press conferences. We read, was that throw accurate? Did he actually make that play? Like the Trey Lance play you spoke about. We would see that play and be like, holy crap, this guy's amazing. But you don't see the wide open guy running over the top. And so it's such an interesting way for us to experience evaluating QBs from the vantage point of a quarterback who you're really validating a lot of things that we've believed in about Drew Lock, but now we can see that there's actually substance to it. So I think that's hugely valuable.
Well, honestly, what's been crazy about this to me is I'm seeing what you guys have been obviously dealing with for 17 weeks, right? I'm seeing it from the, like, people who just love or hate the kid. And it's like, listen, maybe I should stop doing the good and the bad on the video and do the bad and the good, because then people would turn on the video and then right away it'd be bad and they'd be like, oh, this guy hates Drew Lock, right? But, like, anyone who's, and that's what I appreciate about the people that actually watch it, is it's like, there's too many people who are like, oh, this guy just likes Drew Lock. It's like, dude, like, literally we spend half the video talking about the things he struggled with, and then the video I did about the case for him was I just felt like fans weren't really seeing, like, the growth. They were, like, seeing that he statistically did better in Week 14 against the Panthers. But that's not what gets an NFL franchise to stay invested in you. Like, we act like all these guys are stupid. Like, everyone who cuts a check for over $10 million to a kid to play a position, and I don't know what Drew's going to make. He's a second-round pick, so probably not that. But anytime you pay someone that amount of money, you're going to know everything about that asset, right? Think about it on, like, a much smaller term. Like, small business owners, like, know what they pay, the guy who comes and changes out just like the paper towel, right? Like, everything about these, things that you're invested in and doing. And so for me, it's, I wanted Broncos country to see, hey, man, here's the argument for him. And again, I'm not saying that means it's going to be great, but here's why these guys and why you're seeing smart guys say, you know what, this kid could be something, and I think it's, Ian Rappaport, I think, said today, part of what makes the, was it him? I don't know, or maybe, I don't know who it was.
It may have been James Palmer. I think I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, and he said this is why the job's appealing, is they've got stability or, or whatever in long term, and then they've got the quarterback. So it's like, dude, there's people in the league that believe it, and, I really, and this is something that I've been frustrated with, I really would be genuinely curious to anyone who's, like, anti-Drew Lock to make the argument outside of the analytics and stats, which I get and I totally respect, but just, like, watch any of my breakdowns and be like, here's where I thought you were wrong. And I would listen, right? I mean, I know I'm an arrogant jerk on Twitter, apparently, according to everyone who responds to me, but I would listen if someone was like, hey, genuinely, Tim, here at the 12-minute mark, this is what I saw. The issue is, right, is a majority of the people that I've been interacting with, they, like, hate the kid, say he struggles against cover 2. They tweet out a clip that's cover 1, starts as cover 2, but it's actually cover 1. and then they say that I threatened them and they block me. So that's been my interaction with Broncos media so far.
Yeah.
Well, maybe more people would like him if like he didn't wear his hat backwards or dance on the sideline, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, the dancing. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
who was Colin Coward with the hat backwards?
Oh my
thing?
gosh.
That's
gosh.
so good. What a take.
Yeah, Colin had to really jump off the Drew bandwagon really fast. So
Yeah, that was great. That was great. My favorite. I love the people that were like, I love the people that I see responding to me like, oh, Drew Lock sucks, your breakdowns suck. And then I look on their Twitter feed and the last thing they retweeted was Colin Coward saying Drew Lock's an MVP candidate. It's like, okay. Yeah. Sounds good, man.
So one of the things that I think is pretty fascinating is I think that with Drew, you know, you're looking at it from, you know, everything that is his week 1 to week 17. So we're talking about to use this phrase that we've seen so often with Twitter is the Drew Lock apologist, right? Or the Drew Lock hunters, basically, right? I want to know why whenever, and to what you were saying, Tim, it's like I don't hate analytics. I mean, like, it makes me feel like a nerd whenever I read an analytics chart. But why is it that they will always show weeks 1 to 17? I completely understand it's a finished product. You know, it's the week 1 to 17. But when you look at his Miami game to the end of the season, why aren't you guys showing that? I mean,
yeah.
I guess that's kind of my thinking is like, why aren't you guys showing the whole picture? It's one thing to show, you know, the weeks 1 to 17, but why not show the weeks, you know, from the Miami game all the way to week 17? Because if you do that, that is clear progression, you know, clear as day, even in the analytic department.
Yeah, well, I think it doesn't fit the narrative, right? So I think that's why we don't see him do it, which is frustrating because then it's like more about being right than being honest, you know? And I think I think we're seeing that then reflect in the fan base of what they think is going on versus what, you know, I think is actually going on the
or
tape.
what they want to have happen, basically.
Yeah, and it's and I think that's what's important, right? And that's where it's like, listen, I've been on record as saying I think he could be a top 10 quarterback. I'll also be the guy that if we're sitting here talking about the same mistakes next year, that'll say, let's look at drafting a quarterback, right? Let's take Levi Lewis from Louisiana. I think he's a really good player. But, yeah, so that to me is where it's like, you know, yeah, you can take Spencer Rattler, right, from Oklahoma. I think it's all about being honest with where your take is. But I think currently what we're seeing is a lot of people that didn't like Drew's game and want to frame it in a way because they want to be right, which I think is all Twitter is.
Right. Yeah, it's all reactionary, 100%. Do you guys have any final questions, final thoughts to kind of wrap it up a little bit?
Yeah, so here's my controversial question that we talked about before the pod. So are you, and I can't stress the importance of this question enough, are you on team candy corn or are you not on team candy corn? That's been a recurring thing.
Oh my
God.
You're talking about the actual candy, right?
Yes. It's been a consistent theme throughout our podcast.
I just want to make sure that that's what you're talking about because, like, I don't know if this is even appropriate for your podcast, but someone tweeted at me the other day and was like, I'm going to give you all of my OnlyFans money if you train Drew Lock. And it's like, what is that? And someone responded what it was, and I'm like, thank God I didn't search that on the house computer. Yeah. My wife walks out, I'm like, oh my gosh. So, yeah, okay, make sure we're talking about actual candy corn. Yeah, no, my wife puts out candy corn around the holidays. Will I grab a couple every once in a while? Yeah, of course, because I'm a sugar addict. Would I pick that over, like, another candy? No, I wouldn't. So I would say I'm not team candy corn, but every once in a while I'll dip my foot in there.
Well, it was nice to know you, Tim. That's cool.
Maddie, I don't want you to turn on me. It's just there's no way that you're sitting there. There's no way you go out to dinner and you're sitting at a steakhouse and the menu has candy corn, and you think to yourself, I'll take that over the creme brulee. That's not happening, Matty.
I've never had that option. I can honestly say that's never been an option for me. Yep. But, maybe I'm going to the wrong steakhouses, so let me know.
Where is it that gives you the jelly beans in Denver? Del Frisco's, right? Or something like that? I don't know.
I've actually never been to Del Frisco, so I can't really say, but that would be something if they gave you jelly beans.
I don't know.
Yeah. Well, Tim, it was a blast. It was a blast, bro. It was a blast having you on, and I think our hope is that this won't be the last time having you on.
I'd love to come on and talk quarterbacks when I've watched more of them and the draft gets closer. And I appreciate you guys, man. What you guys do is awesome. The way people react to you guys on Twitter too is cool. It's cool to see all the people that love what you guys are doing. So I'm very envious at times of the replies that you guys get and how much people like you. And then I say one thing and it's like hatred.
It's like the scene in Shrek where bring out your pitchforks, basically.
Exactly.
Good luck tweeting this episode out. That'll be fun. You'll hear a bunch of people that won't listen to the episode and be like, "That guy sucks."
Right. But before we go, obviously we know, and hopefully, the listeners by now know where to follow your stuff and get a chance to maybe hit you up for another question or a question that we didn't answer in this podcast. And I know you got another one set up over on Broncos Brawl that all three of us are also excited about, and I know you are too. What are some places that people can hit you up so you can plug your stuff?
Yeah, if they if you want to watch the breakdowns, there's a YouTube channel. We call it All Things QB. I think it's pretty good. It's it can help. I think the biggest way that I describe it is hopefully it helps what you're seeing on Sunday. Hopefully it makes the game more fun to actually watch. And then just on Twitter, right? At T Jenkins Elite, if you want to tweet at me, and I would love if you would tweet like, "Hey man, I like what you're doing," but you could tweet whatever. Or you can DM me. That thing's a dirty, dirty place that I'm never checking again. I have like 3 people. I've figured out how to separate my inboxes.
Thankfully, I'm one of those people.
Yeah,
Thankfully, I'm one of those people.
It just happened the other day where it's I can organize my messages, and I'm like, oh, this is awesome. So now I have this whole never read, and then I'm gonna read.
Yeah, that's called the mute the group chat and mute the mentions, mute the group chat, mute entire.
I'm not gonna lie, that whole thing was fun. I went into this absolute cave of people that hated me, and I talked and I just said, "What's up?" And it was wild. It was a wild time. So
that's impressive. That's impressive that many people were so hurt by your positive opinion.
49 people were in the group, and 2 guys. I mean, I made it pretty public, but 2 guys that are actually have podcasts and stuff about the Broncos were in the group. It was good though. I was thinking to myself, I should have gave them my wife's burner account because she would probably enjoy a little bit. She doesn't like hearing people that like me, so she'd probably like to get in there and be like, "You wouldn't believe he left his socks out yesterday." So
man, we should have got into that stuff earlier in the podcast. So your wife has a burner account,
taking a picture of the socks next to the laundry hamper and talk to him about accuracy.
Yep, that's exactly what it is. I always like to pretend that the people that tweet the outlandish stuff are just Emily, my bride on some random account. It makes me feel better. It makes me think it's not a real person.
Well, whenever you're free, Tim, you are more than welcome to hop on back with us on this Manely Broncos podcast. So you are more than welcome.
I appreciate it, man. It was a blast. Thanks for having me, fellas.
Yeah, door is always open. And so for anybody that is listening, you guys can check out our podcast over on Spotify, over on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts and iHeartRadio as well. And you guys can also follow the Manely Broncos Twitter handle at Manely Broncos. But yeah, it's been absolutely a blast, and we can't wait to do it again with you, Tim.
Love it, man. That was awesome.
Saddle up.